scary. Thank you for setting all this up for us today. That's very kind of you. We appreciate it. So, when I was first asked to talk on one of these displays, I came and looked at all the displays. First I read them online, and I offered about 12 different topics that we could possibly talk about tying to any one of these panels. And the one that seemed to grab attention was this one. There we go. America Victorious, 1781 to 1783. That's a lot of ground to cover in an hour. So you'll have to bear with me as we pass through some of these notable events. But what an exciting time in American history. So I'll have to give a little background, of course, because it doesn't make sense if you don't start with that. So I'll do a little agenda, give you some background, get you into 1781, and then we'll talk about that year of climactic engagements, where America is victorious and it presses towards victory. And then 1782 is an interesting year too, but mostly for what's happening off of our continental shores. And it's going to have a big bearing on our future, so it's important to know that. And then 1783, the joyous culmination of the American Revolution. So there's three phases of the war. Typically, historians will talk about these phases in this way. There's New England, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Southern campaigns, and you can see the years. New England is, the British idea there is that this is a New England problem. We will just contain those rowdy New Englanders, and they won't bother us any longer. That didn't work so well. The battles of Lexington and Concord, then they have Washington siege of Boston. It's successful. They take the cannons from Ticonderoga and they line the hills, and the British have to evacuate. They're very embarrassed by this. And then we have the failed invasion of Canada, and there'll be more on that later. Then we have the Middle Atlantic campaign. This is a British aim to capture New York and use New York as a staging area, mostly to crush Pennsylvania, where they know that the Independence Hall and all those patriots are gathering, plotting all those nefarious things. So in this area of the battle, you have George Washington and the fight for New York, his comeback, if you will, for Trenton and Princeton, and we can talk about that at another time, the little Christmas celebration that he waged for the British. The Saratoga campaign, which was John Burgoyne's master plan to two British armies to capture the Hudson River, one coming down from Canada, the other up from New York, and then they could cut New Englanders off once again. This also didn't go very well. There's the surrender of General Burgoyne's forces at Saratoga. It's possibly one of the most important campaigns of the war, though, because it convinces France that we can possibly win this war, and they decide to come in on our side. Had Saratoga not happened, had we not won in Saratoga, we probably would have lost the revolution, and it would have been years before we were liberated. We have the Battle of Brandywine Creek outside of Philadelphia. That doesn't go particularly well, and the British come to Philadelphia, but the whole Congress leaves, so they don't really capture much. We have the French alliance, and then Spain enters the war, and so it's turned into a world war. And a lot of times when you talk to international historians, the American Revolution is just a backwater to this major war. Pierce Mackesy, a British historian, wrote a wonderful book on this war. And the final shots are fired in the early 1800s in southern India. And we just don't think of it that way. We're so busy concentrating on our little piece of this. But one of the reasons the British let us go is they had bigger fish to fry. Then we have the Southern Campaign, which is where we'll spend our time today. The Southern Campaign, the British aim here is to move to the South, and there's a lot of things in the South. I teach on religious history sometimes, and it's fascinating, American religious history. It really is. It's just wild and crazy, and lots of religious groups, and some practicing free love and eating really bizarre things, and it's really neat. But nevertheless, the Anglicans are very, very strong in Virginia. It's been incorporated as the state religion, and they're pushing all the other people out. So the Baptists, Presbyterians, and Methodists have to head to the hills, where they do really well, running circuit riders and converting all the backwoods, and all the people, when we talk about the over-the-mountain people, a lot of them are going to be Methodists and Baptists for that reason. But nevertheless, the British think they can go and get these Anglicans back on track, and that they'll all come over to the crown. And oh yes, there's slaves down there too, and we'll give them their freedom so they can fight for us. And oh yes, Indians who are sick and tired of the over-mountain men taking their land from them, so we'll get the Indians too, and this will go just extraordinarily well. And once we've got the South galvanized, those three colonies, we'll push back north and we'll take the whole thing back. Then you have the major event. Henry Clinton's named commander-in-chief. I'll talk more of that later, after General Howe is humiliated and resigns. General Clinton introduces his Southern strategy with that aim I just told you. The British capture Savannah. That's not a near-run thing. We have the British land there on December 23rd. They are waiting for more Brits to march up from Florida, and he says, there's nothing in front of me, I'm just going to go ahead and take it. He marches in, takes Savannah, and the defenders of Savannah flee to South Carolina. So it's not that near-run battle. Then we have the year of 1780. If there is a low point in the American Revolution, it is the year of 1780. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong in 1780. And there's times that we think it's all over. We're going to lose this one. It starts with the British capture of Charleston, South Carolina, single worst defeat in the American Revolutionary War. An entire army is vanquished there. About 6,000 men go into captivity. General Cornwallis is going to assume command. That actually plays both good and bad. Cornwallis is a fairly brilliant strategist, but he doesn't get along with his boss. And to pay him back for past wrongs that were incurred during the Battle of Charleston, his boss is going to starve him of troops and supplies. And thankfully, when we have to face Cornwallis at Yorktown, he's still going to be suffering from those lack of troops and lack of supplies. So you should get along with your boss. Battle of Camden. We lose another army at the Battle of Camden, so we've lost 2 armies now, and Washington is very fearful that he'll lose a third in the South. He thinks he's losing the war in the South, so this is a really bad time. Then we have General Benedict Arnold, who joins the British in September 1780, and his name pops up repeatedly in American Revolutionary history. His wife, lovely Peggy, is on that second banner over there at the top. She was actually a spy working for the British as well, so more on her later. But then we have a turning point, and certainly the turning point of the war is this battle, the Battle of Kings Mountain. And I hope you get to see Kings Mountain. I hope you drive over there just to hike Kings Mountain, because it's gorgeous. As the small photo shows, it's a rolling hill crowned at the top, which is why it's called Kings Mountain, by these jutting granite stones. And that's where the British were going to camp. So the Battle of Kings Mountain is this military engagement between patriots and the British, but they're not really British, they're loyalists. This is actually the only battle in the American Revolution that there's no British or Hessians fighting in. This is an all-American battle. And a lot of historians will tell you the American Revolution is really a civil war. In fact, more Americans died at the hands of other Americans during the American Revolution than died at the hands of both British and Hessians combined. We're killing each other at dramatic rates, and not so nicely. Most civil wars do tend to get rather violent. So what we have here is a Major Patrick Ferguson of the 71st Foot. Now, Ferguson has been going up and down this area, and he has promised these patriots that if you continue to resist the British Army and take protection under and do not take protection under a standard, I will march my troops over the mountains, I will hang your leaders, and I will burn your farms. This riles the people on the other side of the mountain, who just happen to be Tennesseans. They're not Tennesseans yet, they're North Carolinians, but they're going to be Tennesseans, and some of the people I'm going to introduce you to should be familiar to you if you've studied Tennessee history. So Colonel Ferguson's alert that he's going to burn their farms gets over there, and they're pretty ticked. And the word gets over there. His message is delivered to Sullivan County, North Carolina, to militia leader Isaac Shelby there on the right. Isaac Shelby lives in what we now know as Bristol, Tennessee. And Isaac is not pretty happy with Ferguson's message. He goes to his neighbor there on the left, Colonel John Seaver, for whom Seaverville is mentioned, is named today, also from Tennessee. And he says, what do you think we ought to do about this? Why don't we get all our friends who run county militias and gather together and go, kick some British butt? And that's what they decide to do. So they start going around, and 5 counties get together, and before too long, word spread, and by the 25th of August, they've got 1,000 men. The following day, they begin their march, and then they get Colonel Benjamin Cleveland and Joseph Winton join them. And by the time they're in North Carolina proper, what we'd call North Carolina today, they've got 1,400 men. Now, the militia are well aware that they're amateurs, although they are experienced Indian fighters. But they are not being paid. They do not have issued weapons. They do not have uniforms. They have no promise of pay, and they've been ordered not to do anything. So everything that happens in this battle is completely concocted out of the minds of those patriot leaders. But nevertheless, the over the mountain men, what we would call today Tennesseans, the Tennesseans are going to march over that mountain, and they're going to confront Ferguson for that vicious threat that he made to them. On October 5th, they learned that Ferguson is camped on top of this mountain, Kings Mountain. And you can see the settlement, how he's got it set up on top. It's a nice viewpoint. He can see things coming at him from all around. However, he doesn't see the Tennesseans. The Tennesseans start to sneak up, and they surround him. And on the outside of that horseshoe shape, you can see names. Those are names of all the Tennessee militias that surround him. They're marching in the pouring rain, so they can't be seen. At 3 o'clock the following afternoon, on the 7th of October, they have them completely encircled, and then they attack. This is the Tennesseans coming up the mountain to attack. Pivotal battle was an event in the Southern Campaign. The surprising victory of the American Patriots over the Loyalists came after that string of Patriot defeats, so it rejuvenated the entire nation. This was the turning point in the war. Everybody thought, oh my gosh, we can win again. Ferguson himself is killed. He's shot from his horse saddle. His foot is caught on the stirrups, and he rides from that horseshoe shape all the way to the other end of that flat mesa before his body finally drops. And they take every loyalist either prisoner or is killed. No one gets away from Kings Mountain. It's a stunning victory. Ferguson dead, Loyalist militias destroyed. Cornwallis now decides that North Carolina is too dangerous for him. He retreats into Virginia. And that takes us into 1781. First, I want to talk about the key personalities, because personalities matter, and the leaders matter. And I've told you long ago when we first met, some of you were there for that, I said history, there's different types of histories. There's political history, and diplomatic history, and military history, economic history, all those different classes of history. One of them is biographical history. And it says you don't have a World War II without an FDR, and without a Hitler, without a Stalin, or with a Churchill. They look at individuals, so people matter. So for those of you in the room who might be biological historians, it's always important to lay some of these personalities out. The first personality I want to talk to is General Henry Clinton. He lives with his father, the governor of New York, so he's familiar with New York. He knows something about this area. He fights in the 7 Years' War in Germany. Remember, the 7 Years' War is an international war. The French-Indian War is, again, a backwater of what is a larger world war. In 1767, Henry marries Harriet Carter, the daughter of a landed gentry. The marriage was performed in haste. 6 months after they were married, Frederick was born. The couple produced 5 children. Clinton's wife died in 1772, and Henry, who was a very sensitive man, plummeted into grief. And for the rest of his life, he seemed to be a deeply, deeply troubled and disturbed man, possibly from the loss of Harriet. He arrives in Boston in May 1775. He fights at Breeds and Bunker Hill in 1775, and he wrote of that, "A dear-bought victory, another such would have ruined us. The British suffered 1,000 casualties in that." And the fact that Britain wins battles but loses wars is how this revolution is going to go for them. They're going to constantly win territory but lose so many lives they can't replace them. And that's going to be a standard in 1781 as well. He led the siege of Charleston. That was successful. That's where he and his subordinate Cornwallis got sideways at each other. And in 1783, Clinton publishes his narrative of the campaign of 1781 in North America, in which he attempted to lay nearly all the blame for the failures on Cornwallis. Cornwallis is an interesting figure too. He's born there in 1738. He fights in the 7 Years' War, also in Germany. He enters Parliament in 1760, the same year he gets married. He marries Jemima Tulloch Jones, which I think is a wonderful name, daughter of a regimental colonel. If you were an officer, you bought your way into the ranks. And how this worked in merry old Britain is the first son got all the inheritance. The second son and subsequent sons had to find their own way. And they found their way the Navy if they were well connected, and if they weren't well connected, they found their way in the Army. And they usually had to buy their way in to get a position in the Army. Once they bought their way in, then you tried to hook up with other people. Marrying the regimental colonel's daughter is a really good idea. They were a happy couple. They had 2 children, although Jemima passed away in 1779. I put the ages of all these people at the bottom. Very few of them lived to 70. There's only one in my list that lived to 70. He fights in the New York campaign. He's commander of the rear guard at the Battle of Monmouth. He fights at Camden. And Camden, Clinton, and Cornwallis developed a dislike for each other at Charleston. They're barely on speaking terms when Clinton finally leaves in New York. Clinton's going to leave Cornwallis behind, undermanned and undersupplied. Was it intentional? According to Clinton's memos, no. He had a war and he was worried that Washington was going to attack New York, but in fact it played well for the Patriots. Cornwallis returns to Britain with none other than Benedict Arnold, and there's Peggy Arnold's picture over there again, and they were both cheered when they landed in January of 1782, although Benedict did not have a particularly good life in Great Britain. My third British leader, who comes up quite often when you're talking about the South, is Bannister Tarleton. Tarleton, that handsome figure that you see in there, he was very handsome. He was painted by three great painters. Joshua Reynolds, this is his, Gainsborough and Conway all painted him, and he didn't pay for it. They wanted to get his picture. He was a star, if you will, of the British press. His personal life was complicated. He had a 15-year relationship with the actor and writer Mary Robinson, who was known as Perdita at the time because she had played in The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare's Winter Tale, where she played Perdita for so long that she became identified with the part. And she was the ex-mistress of the Prince of Wales, William, who's going to become George IV, and that's pretty exciting. And they had no children at all, but she was important to his parliamentary career, writing many of his speeches later on. He probably loved Perdita all his life, although he did marry again in 1798. He married Susan Bertie, illegitimate daughter of a wealthy Duke of Ancaster. They had no children, although he also fathered an illegitimate children that we know of, probably more. Because again, he's a Hollywood couple. He's married to the leading star. He's the leading military, the handsome guy to Gainsborough. And this picture, by the way, is room wall size. I mean, that's a 12-foot picture. It's just huge. Everybody knew him. Anyway, back to his history. His big do was on 13 December 1766. He was out on patrol, and he surrounded this basking house, and inside was no other than General Charles Lee. So he captures General Charles Lee. This is a real coup. I don't know what that noise was. Sorry about that. Then he fights at Brandywine and Monmouth, and he's always at cavalryman. And you can see him there. What he's doing there is changing horses and restrapping his sword to his leg. Now that picture is interesting because it doesn't show his right hand. He was very disturbed about his right hand because at Guilford Courthouse, his right hand received a ball and he lost a couple fingers. The big thing that we always hear about him was how vicious he was, what an awful person he was. That reputation starts at the Battle of Waxhaw Creek on 29 May 1780. Tarleton was leading a force of 149 mounted soldiers. They overtook a detachment of retreating Continentals led by Abraham Buford. Probably about somewhere between 350 and 380 colonials who were marching away. Tarleton said surrender, Buford said no. He thought he could make an escape. Tarleton's men were mounted, Buford's men were on foot. He's not going to make it. So Buford is moving, and he realized that there's fighting on his rear guard. Tarleton has attacked. So Buford rushes back, grabs a white flag, and waves a white flag. And the Brits don't seem to notice that. They go through the lines, hacking and killing even wounded men on the ground. Out of the 350 some odd, 113 soldiers were killed, many of them wounded on the ground. 203 more were captured, and we started to hear this story about a bloody band and Tarleton's quarter because they had asked for a quarter and they got none. There's another story about this. The surgeon who was with the Patriots actually wrote about this 30 years later. And he said what actually happened was as the Tarleton arrived at the scene, a musket went off and his horse was hit. Tarleton goes plummeting on the ground. The British think that the Americans have fired after they showed a white flag and they take revenge. Tarleton himself says he was unconscious during the entire thing. He takes no knowledge of it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Politicians even back then. Turning to the Americans, General Nathanael Greene, he was born a Quaker, which is interesting because Quakers are supposed to be nonviolent, not fight, and there's a group of Quakers that actually join. And Rhode Island's an interesting place anyway. We could talk a lot about Rhode Island. When George Washington, he didn't want black soldiers. And Congress passed a law saying, unless you're already in ranks, we're not having any black soldiers. It's Rhode Island that says, oh no, we're going to have black soldiers, and we're going to have a lot of them. And they raise an entire brigade. And if you look over on that poster, Freedom from Slavery, and look at the people, all the people they're showing you in uniform, they're all Rhode Island because that's where we start. George realizes he was wrong, and he changes his mind, and then we start to bring black troops into the American Army shortly thereafter. But that's kind of interesting to follow the Quakers in Rhode Island through American history. He's appointed to lead the Rhode Island militia, and he's appointed then to the Continental Army because he's shown himself to be a good leader. He fought at Boston, New York, and New Jersey. He's appointed the Quartermaster General of the Army. Being the Quartermaster General means that you supply food and ammunition. Since Congress and the states were not giving him anything to pass on, it was a really, really tough job. Greene fumed over the lack of congressional support. It made him a lifelong advocate for a stronger national government, so we're going to see him pop up later when they're talking about changing the government. In 1780, in frustration, he resigns from his position. He sends a letter to Congress that is so toxic that the congressmen want to vote him out of office, out of rank. They want to pull his commission. Washington intervenes on his behalf personally to say, I need this man, but he goes into retirement for a year. He's recalled a year later, and he's put in command of the Continental Army in the South. After Benedict Arnold was defeated, Greene briefly served as commandant of West Point, so his portrait is there on the wall of West Point for that reason. And again, he commands in the South, so he takes a lot of credit for what I'm going to describe in the South. General Light Horse Harry Lee makes an appearance repeatedly. There's two people who make an appearance here. On the British side is Tarleton, and on this side is Light Horse Harry Lee. Although there's another, William Washington, a distant cousin of George Washington. In several battles, all of a sudden you'll see this American cavalry miraculously appear on the field. Shield, save the day. It's William Washington almost every time. If it's not Light Horse Harry, it's William. He was captain of dragoons, from which we get the word goons, big people who do bad things to you. It actually comes from the word dragon. They carried a short-barreled musket that was we would now call a carbine, and it fired around, and because it was short barrel, it expelled a lot of fire at the end. So it was a dragon spewing flames, and the men who carried the dragon were called the dragoons. That's where it gets the name. They tended to fight mounted or unmounted, so they could fight as cavalry, they could fight as infantry, so they kind of mounted infantry. He commanded Lee's Legion, named after him, as a mixed corps of cavalry and infantry that served in both in major battles, but also in conducting reconnaissance and surveillance. Today, when we do reconnaissance, and I'm an Air Force guy, we use satellites, we use U-2 spy planes, we use lower drones and stuff. Back then, your reconnaissance, the eyes of the Army were your cavalry. And if you want to know how bad it gets when you don't have it, read Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg. He's livid that the cavalry has gone off on some operation. He doesn't know what's in front of him. And he basically accuses his cavalry leader of blinding the Army by running off. So Harry Lee is the eyes of the Army. At the Battle of Paulus Hook in 1778, he leads a detachment on raid that results in 50 enemy soldiers being killed, another 158 captured at the cost of only 2 patriots killed and 3 wounded. The following September, Congress votes to give him a gold medal. He is the only man not in a general rank to receive a gold medal from Congress during the American Revolution. It is an amazing feat that he pulls off at Paulus Hook. He fights at Yorktown. He serves in Congress. He's called by Washington to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion. One of the things you may know about Harry Lee, at Washington's funeral on the 26th of December, 1799, it was Lee who said, first in heart, first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. So he was a good spokesman too. And of course, he's the father of Robert E. Lee. So that's going to come back to haunt America in a little while. There's another one, General Daniel, the Old Wagoneer Morgan. As a young man, Morgan worked in lumber, felling trees and running a sawmill. Then he bought wagons and he became a teamster, ultimately running a shipping company, and that's how he got his nickname, the Old Wagoneer. He worked as a teamster during the French and Indian Wars. During the retreat from Fort Duquesne, he became involved with a dispute with a British officer. And he was a rather large man, and he had a temper, and he slugged the British officer, apparently knocked him to the ground. He was punished with 499 lashes, a death sentence for most ordinary men, but he survived this. He also survived a bullet to the right cheek, which took out all the teeth on one side, fired by an Indian. So he was a really rough and tumble fellow. Morgan's men he marched there at the front, pointed to the lead rifle company. They were using long rifles that they had got manufactured from home. These are individually made, so they had separate type of load. You couldn't change load with the person next to you, but they had really long barrels, they had a spinning round, and they were very, very accurate. So Morgan would go and he would shoot the British behind their lines. what we'd call sniper duty now. His best net was 10 soldiers on one day, preferably officers. Washington was so upset by this, he thought it was not a dignified way to fight a war, that he stopped supplying Morgan with powder. So he couldn't shoot anymore, which I find funny. Anyway, he fights at Saratoga. At Saratoga, he suffers a lot of bodily injury, and he has a back problem, he has leg problems, and he decides he needs to retire. He's recalled to duty in 1780, and like so many of these men, his obligation to serve his nation outweighs his personal needs, so he comes back. He's ordered by Greene to harass the enemy and avoid engagement, but he disobeys that order, and he's going to fight at the Battle of Cowpens, which we'll talk about in a moment. And lastly, got to talk about General George Washington. You know George Washington, so I don't have to add a great deal to him, but I will tell you that there's wonderful histories on him. There's certain people in our history that you can just find tons of books on. George Washington's one, Abraham Lincoln's one, George Custer. There's as many books on George Custer as there are on Washington, I would say. But nevertheless, he's a fascinating man, and he's the necessary man. Every time this country is in distress in his first days, we turn to George Washington, and the country still grieves for his loss. On the French side, Francois Joseph Paul de Grasse. Admiral de Grasse entered service during the 7 Years' War. He helped rebuild the French fleet after that, made a good name for himself. He fought at Grenada, and he defeated Fort Hood at Tobago. And Hood's going to come back and fight him again during the American Revolution and that extended World War. He commands the French fleet at the Battle of the Chesapeake, what we call the Battle of the Capes. He's defeated by Admiral Rodney at the Battle of Saintes, and that's down in the Caribbean. He's married 3 times. He outlives his first 2 wives. In addition, while serving in India during the 7 Years' War, it appears he has a son, illegitimately, the French Indian boy in Calcutta. The boy's born somewhere around 1780. He's known at the time as Azar Le Guin. De Grasse brings the boy back to Paris, adopts him, sends him to formal education. He becomes George de Grasse. After his father's death, the young man moves to the United States. He settles in New York, where he works for a short time for Aaron Burr. Burr likes him so much, he gives him 2 plots of land, and George de Grasse becomes a naturalized citizen of the United States in 1804. And you're going to find that a lot, too, is that a lot of these people knew each other, and they run into each other again and again in their lives. Next one is the Marquis de Lafayette, and there's another character that you could talk a lot about. Lafayette, he's attracted to the American Revolution because of his ideals. He fights at Brandywine, he fights at the Battle of Rhode Island. George Washington, who has no children, seems to adopt Lafayette as kind of a son. They're very, very close. And Lafayette's eventually going to name his son George Washington Lafayette in a tribute to his friend. His big accomplishment in the American Revolution, he returns to France and begs French to support for the revolution, and he is successful. He's held in an Austrian prison from 1792 to 97, joins the Chamber of Deputies. He declines to be a French dictator. They actually offer him the equivalent of the crown after the revolution, and he declines it because he's a good man. One of the things that I find funny is this. In 1824, President James Monroe invites Lafayette to return to the United States. He's the last living general for the American Revolution, and we want to welcome him home. He visits all 24 states, and everywhere he goes, he gets these big, big, big gatherings. When he arrives in New York on the 16th of August, 1824, it's the first triumphal parade in New York history. They didn't have ticker tape then, but 1/5 of the population fell out. So in an age when crowd size seems to be a really, really important thing, Lafayette won that battle a long time ago. And he won it because he wasn't an outsider. He wasn't a Frenchman, he was one of us. He was one of our generals. Upon his return, he went and visited George Washington, then retirement at Mount Vernon, and they had a very, very nice sentimental reunion. He did the same with Thomas Jefferson at Monticello. Jean-Baptiste Rochambeau, he's the general who's going to be in charge of the French forces there at Yorktown. He too fights in the 7 Years' War. He's older. He also fought in the War of Austrian Secession. He lands in Newport with 7,000 troops in 1780 and sits there, and Washington aids it. Remember, 1780, everything's going wrong in South, and I've got this army of 7,000 Frenchmen, complete with siege guns, and they're just sitting there. And Rochambeau says, I'm not going anywhere until I get the French Navy behind me. Washington wants them to hit New York, but without a Navy, there's no way. New York's too well defended. So Washington believes that the Navy's going to come up here, and they're going to let me attack New York. The French are going to play a trick on them. They're not going to New York. The French don't believe they can take New York even with the Navy. They're going to go to the Chesapeake, and that's going to catch George by surprise. He's going to embrace that plan when they put him in charge, and it's going to go swell. 1781, these are the actions I want to talk about. And you're probably wondering why one of them is up there. I'll get to that. This is a map of the battle in the South. And you can't follow all of those squiggly lines and all of those flashpoints. There are a lot of battles. We could be here all day talking about all the battles, and any one of them would be a long talk. So I'm going to breeze through these. I'm going to try to hit the ones that made a huge difference. And I'm going to start with this one, the Battle of Cowpens. Washington ordered Daniel Morgan to simply annoy the enemy, not to risk any more forces. We didn't want a face-to-face fight. We could not afford to lose the Third Army in the South. So Morgan is not going to fight. He's just going to inflict these hit-and-run tactics. He's doing this pretty successfully, and then he finds himself pursued by no one other than Banastre Tarleton. Tarleton is coming up behind Morgan, and we all remember what happened last time that Banastre Tarleton came up behind the colonial fort. It didn't go well for the colonials. So he's hurrying as fast as he can, and then he realizes that the Broad River just in front of him, blocking his way to Virginia's in flood stage. He can't cross it. He's got to stand and fight. So he's going to disobey Washington orders. He's going to turn around and he's going to make his stand. He chose his battle space, a place called Hannah's Cowpens. And it's called Cowpens because this is where farmers bought their cows to be fattened to send them to market. It was nice pastoral fields with lots for them to eat. It's an ideal site, not just for the cattle, but also for the battle. What you see here, the red line is where the British are going to stand. That first line of steady, the 4 blue across, is a small hill. The second line of 4 blue across is another hill, and behind that's an impression called the Swale, in which Morgan's going to hide his cavalry. He visits the men at the campsite there the night before the battle on 16th. He goes to every campsite and he assures people 2 things. 1, you're going to be okay. And 2, all you have to do is fire 2 rounds and then run. And they think this is a great deal, because I do not want to go head-to-head with the British Army. That hasn't worked real well for the colonials. But if I only got to fire 2 rounds and then run, I'm with you, Daniel. So that's what they're going to do. So Morgan deploys his hand-picked troops in front. Right in front of those 2 lines, he's got these basically sharpshooters. And so he also counts on Tarleton is chasing, remember. Tarleton is this impetuous young lad who probably won't stop to see the situation. He'll probably just charge onto the battlefield, and we'll take advantage of that. And that's exactly what happens. The morning of the 17th, Tarleton arrives, and he immediately deploys his dragoons, the big guys with the small muskets who are getting off their horses, and they're moving forward. The sharpshooters start opening fire on them, and they're starting to pick off some of the dragoons. Tarleton realizes that this isn't going well. I've got to pull in my land forces, and he takes his infantry, that long red line, and they go. They march onto the field of battle. They raise their muskets, fire a volley, shout hooray 3 times. I don't know what that's supposed to do. And then they go on the march again while they're reloading. At 100 paces, the American militia delivers its first volley, and the British line starts to dwindle. People are collapsing. As they're trying to get reassembled into their nice line, walking abreast of each other in red coats, which seems like a horrible way to fight a war, the Patriots fire a second round. And it's equally devastating, and the red are pulsed again. Tarleton thinks it's not going particularly well at this point, but then he sees something. The blue coats are fleeing the battlefield. They're actually running. So he thinks he's broken the line. Realizing this, he sends the 17th Dragoons, so the ones on the far right of this picture. There you go, 17th Dragoon. He's going to send them to chase these guys around the corner because he thinks they're at a run. That's not what they're doing. Remember, Morgan told them fire twice, and then you can retreat, and you're going to retreat back there to the Swale where you'll be safe. Interpreting the route, though, Tarleton sent his death and glory boys over the hill, and there they're going after him. Just then, though, William Washington sends his cavalry around, and he intercepts the dragoons. And now we've got a fight. Tarleton sends in his Scottish forces, the Highlanders, and the Highlanders are doing pretty good. They're starting to move forth. The Virginia militia that's on the right side of the Continentals at the top of the 3rd hill start to collapse. And the Scots think they've got him won. Morgan calls his men, says turn and fire. The entire Virginia militia line turns in space, loads and fires, and the entire Scots line drops in front of him. As William Washington arrives just behind him, What we have is a double envelopment, the first double envelopment and only double envelopment that's ever executed on a field of battle in the American Revolution. It is a master stroke. It is still studied today in the Army War College for how it pulled off. Did Morgan intend to do this? Probably not. There's nothing in the writing that said that was his plan, but it was brilliantly executed. Tarleton managed to get a couple of dozen people together and make one last-ditch effort. They're quickly hacked to pieces, and Tarleton manages to retreat. He goes with a handful of men and makes it all the way back to Cornwallis's camp to tell him what has happened. That doesn't go particularly well. Cornwallis listens to the briefing. He's leaning on a sword. He's so heavily leaning on a sword that the blade breaks while he's taking the bad news. Then we have the race to the Dan. This is a minor series of actions. However, it's very important because the American Revolution doesn't survive without the race to the Dan. In fact, had the race to the Dan not occurred, the original United States might have only consisted of 10 colonies instead of 13. That's how a near run this thing was. What we have is that Morgan, who's just won at Cowpens, is seriously depleted. They're low on powder, they're low on manpower, they're low on supplies, and he realizes that he can't get them in the Carolinas. He's got to get to Virginia. About the same time, Greene, who's fighting down here, has reached the same conclusion. He's got to escape too. So they're both in a dead run with Cornwallis and Tarleton behind them. They're going to try to get to the Dan River and make it into Virginia. Morgan knew he was being chased. He gambled he could reconnect with Greene. They could possibly survive. He's in dire straits. He's short on supplies. They reunite at Guilford Courthouse, not for the battle, that's coming later, and they reunite there on the 4th of February. On the 7th of February, they were joined by Light Horse Harry Lee, who's now pulled in a force as well. And by this point, with the three armies together, he's got 2,000 men, which isn't many, but it's more than they had starting off. Now, they've got to go 70 miles. This is in the middle of winter. The ground is red mud. It melts in the day, sticks to men and horses, and you can't make much time. And it freezes hard at night, and it freezes rough, so it can cut the bottom of your feet. So this is terrible terrain to try to pass in the wintertime. But they're making the best of it. Furious over the loss of Cowpens, Cornwallis says, we're going to catch these guys and we're going to stop them. So he tells his men, we're going to go. Well, he's lost most of his light cavalry under Tarleton at the Battle of Cowpens. So he's left to march on foot. To make sure his men don't move too slowly, he burns his own supply wagons, all of their tents and a lot of their supplies. The British are hungry, they're tired, they're worn out, and they're cold as they're trying to catch up to Morgan. Morgan flees through Morgan and Greene by this point, flee through the North Carolina country. Cornwallis is in hot pursuit. The Allies get to the river first. They cross the Dan on the 14th of February. Even though Cornwallis was right behind them, when they cross, they take every boat they can find for 3 miles in either direction. So they've left nothing for the British to cross the river with. And back then, you could swim, but your powder wouldn't stay dry. So you're not going to get an army across the river, particularly in December, January. So the 6-week retreat from Cowpens to the Dan River, known as the Race to the Dan, is a seminal moment that manages to save the revolution. But they're not going to stay on Virginia long. The battle is going to change hands almost immediately. Aware that Cornwallis is boasting about chasing him out of South Carolina, North Carolina, chasing him into Virginia, Greene realizes he's got to do something. He resupplies and he turns and he heads back south almost immediately. He gets to Guilford Courthouse. He'd been there before. He met that Morgan and Lee there just a few weeks earlier. He deploys in 3 parallel lines. He is executing the same strategy that Morgan used at Cowpens, defense in depth. And he's telling his men the same thing, fire a couple rounds and then retreat. And he's going to retreat back through his own lines, which is one of the most complicated things to do for a military formation. And these are militiamen, these are not well trained. So it may not work, but that's what he's telling his people to do. He doesn't have the option of going off to the side because he's got woods on both sides. However, he is going to use those woods. He's going to deploy sharpshooters into the woods. And it's going to take a blistering toll on the British as they're attacking. He's got his North Carolina militia and artillery deployed behind a rail fence in the back there near the Guilford Courthouse. He's got Virginia militia about 300 yards before the first line and 2 Virginia regiments. Behind Greene was the courthouse. He had no reserves at all. Cornwallis deploys his troop in a single line and he's going to march them forth like they're fighting at that time. He's got the remains of Tarleton's legion in the rear. It's not much. Battle commences at noon. This is the picture from the Army War College of how this battle goes. It looks like a mess. It's actually not. What you have is each of those blue lines, as they get, it starts off at the first line there with the dark blue, and then it fades back to join the light blue line, which fades back to join even the lighter blue line. And it works very, very precise. And the Allies are going to survive this one. Now, we have the battle opening furiously with an artillery exchange. The British are outgunning the Americans. It's not very effective on either side. Green's front line fires, and then they retreat back in good order. Patriot riflemen are starting to pick off British from the side, and Cornwallis writes about the battle, there's nothing we can do about it. The trees were too thick for a bayonet attack, and we couldn't see the people who were shooting at us. Under the weight of fire, however, Green's right begins to fail. It begins to fold back. Seeing that the American side was faltering, William Washington moves forward to try to plug the hole, and Cornwallis does something that's kind of unheard of in military history. He sees this melee going in front of him. He realizes that he's got to do something to stop this attack. He orders his artillerymen to fire grape shot into the melee, killing both British and American soldiers. And grape shot is small pieces of iron that are in a cannon and fire like a shotgun shell and clear everything in front of them. So it's kind of a horrific moment on the battle space. Nevertheless, it works. It stumbles the American attack. Seeing there's a potential for disaster, he could lose his army. Green, here in the back, he's going to move out. He's going to head back north, head towards Virginia. Green suffers 260 casualties, 78 dead. Cornwallis wins the field, but it's like Bunker Hill. He has 530 casualties. And unlike Green, he can't replace them. They're losing interest in him after Cowpens, and there's not more British soldiers coming from England because they're fighting the French on European soil. He's also running low on supplies, so he marches his army to Wilmington, Virginia. After Guilford Courthouse, Green reported he was determined to carry the war immediately back into South Carolina, and by mid-April he's reached Camden, the site of the disaster for the previous year. He's faced with expiring enlistment, so he's got troops who want to go home, and they're at the end of their time. He realizes that he's got about 2,400 Continentals. He can count on his militia forces for a short period of time. He's supposed to get some more coming down from the Carolinas. He's also aware that Francis Marion is doing some really neat things in the Pee Dee River Basin. So he turns to Harry Lee and he says, you go join Marion. I'll take all the other militia, all the ones that are investing forts and stuff, and I'll bring them here and we'll talk. He does that, and then he sends some militia back out to get the British forts. There's a chain of 6 British forts that come in from the rivers from Charleston, and he goes after them. I can name them all for you, but I'm pressed for time. So before the Americans can figure out their strategy, Lord Rawdon, who is the British commander in the area, learns what Greene is planning. He says, I'm going to strike him before he can get his troops all together in an order. He decides to attack immediately. He comes back through the night. He finds Greene's sentries, overwhelms them almost immediately, and he could have possibly taken Greene unawares, but Greene responds so quickly to this potential crisis that he manages to deploy his troops. Now you'll see in this map here, it is a blooming mess on this battlefield because he's caught unawares. His men are basically in bivouac when they're attacked. So he's throwing them into lines. He realizes as he's doing this that some of his lines are in front of the British coming towards him. So he says, well, this isn't working, and he just commands an all-out attack. It goes okay at first. He's got a group of Continentals that is marching across the territory in a straight line. They fire their volley, and then all hell breaks loose. They're hit by a counter volley. They start to drop. People are confused. They don't know which direction to go. Greene decides that before he's completely annihilated, he needs to pull out. Who does he call upon? William Washington. William Washington comes on the battle and screens Greene's retreat, manages to save the day. The British win the battle, they hold the land, but the costs were once again really excessive. Greene retreats into fortifications at Camden, and Rawdon, realizing that this is too costly and he cannot possibly pursue the Patriots, he goes back south. By mid-May, all but 2 of the forts that I named have been taken, and 2 of those are going to fall in June. So all the forts are gone. One is going to be, the last one to fall is 96. Old 96 falls when the British can't take it anymore because of the heat, the southern heat and humidity. This is a minor story, and it'll become clear why I'm mentioning this story at the end of it. I used to run a school in Charlottesville, the Federal Executive Institute, teaching executives from the interagency how to run the government. It was a lot of fun. But I used to spend a lot of time at Monticello and did tours for the executives there. So this is a near and dear story to my heart. But again, you'll see why I want to cover this. This is once again Tarleton being Tarleton. In 4th June of 1781, learning that dispatch has captured, they captured a dispatch that Governor Thomas Jefferson of Virginia is hiding out in Charlottesville near his home. He decides that, Cornwallis decides, we're going to go ahead and send people up and try to capture Thomas Jefferson. He's kind of like, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He's kind of like a big treasure. So Tarleton goes on the 3rd of June, takes 180 troopers of his legion and about 70 other mounted men, and they're going to head north. And they're all mounted so they can move fast, because he's got a long way to travel. On the night of June 3rd, Captain John Jouett was at the Cuckoo Tavern in Louisa County when he overhears British soldiers talking about this raid that they're going to make on Charlottesville. He gets on his horse, he gets ahead of the riders, and he rides 40 miles to Jefferson's Monticello estate just south of Charlottesville, where he warns the author of the Declaration of Independence and other settled legislators who are meeting with Jefferson there that the British are coming, the British are coming. It's the midnight ride of Jack Jouett, and in that area he is considered the Paul Revere of the South. So you may have heard that name before. Meanwhile, Tarleton at the Louisa County Courthouse, he's decided he's going to march. He's marching at 2 a.m. Before dawn, he captures and destroys 6 wagons and weapons that are headed towards Greene's army. 6 miles from his objective, he split his force so he could take multiple targets. He's there at the Castle Hill, the home of Dr. Thomas Walker, where he's captured a number of patriots, and these are the only patriots he's going to capture. Everyone else fled. While Tarleton was at Castle Hill, Jouett was reaching Monticello. So Jefferson's guests that morning included a speaker, members of the Virginia Assembly. A detachment of dragoons arrives just minutes after Jefferson leaves. And that's a reenactment that they do at Monticello every year. They came very, very close to capturing Thomas Jefferson. Now, when John Adams runs for president against Thomas Jefferson, this is going to be a big issue, how he fled the scene. He didn't stay to fight the British. He would not have survived had he stayed and fought the British. He did not have a force with him. But in politics, anything you can throw at your enemy, right? So other raiders had routed a militia guard in the fort of the Rivanna and charged into Charlottesville. They came out empty-handed. All the legislators have gone. Jouett's tale is well known in Virginia, particularly that part of Virginia, Charlottesville. But the flight of Jefferson from Charlottesville was largely unknown. We knew he left Monticello, and we knew he went down to his former home there at Poplar's Ridge, but we didn't know the exact route. A few years ago, Charlotte Bailey, Nancy Bolton, Pamela Comberg, Wendy Smith, and Yates Nobles, member of the Albemarle chapter of the National Daughters of the Society of Daughters of the American Revolution, a nonprofit lineage-based membership service organization, decided to spend a year to figure out Jefferson's route. They figured out his route. They published this map. They have a pamphlet, and the pamphlet's available both at the Poplar Forest, but it's also available at Monticello, which is where I first encountered that. And this is my first experience with the DAR doing great things for me as a historian. So I pay back whenever I can, which is why I always take these invitations. So thanks for all you do. And that leads us to the Yorktown campaign. We're building to a climax here. Barras's fleet and Rochambeau's army of 5,000 with the siege guns landed in Newport in 1780. In 1781, Comte de Grasse, then in the Caribbean, he notifies Rochambeau that he's coming north. This is what Washington's been waiting for. I can lay siege to New York. And of course, they're writing back and forth and saying, don't go to New York, don't go to New York, go anywhere else. And where are they going to go? The Chesapeake. Why the Chesapeake? It seemed like a really good idea at the time. You know, to go ahead and take back that area at the south. There wasn't a big force there. They could pull their forces together. But how are you going to get 5,000 Frenchmen from Newport, Rhode Island, all the way to the Chesapeake? Washington abandons his New York plan. He's in favor of the new plan. They put him in charge. He's going to be the commander-in-chief. He receives specifics on de Grasse's fleet, realizes it's a big fleet. They got additional 3,000 troops. So at the same time, he gets word from Lafayette that Cornwallis has established a naval base at Yorktown. And this was Clinton's orders. He wanted to have a naval base so he could be resupplied there, and Clinton told him to hold it. So Washington likes that idea. He just says, you go to Williamstown and you just keep them contained on that peninsula. And that's what Lafayette's going to do, and of course give him intelligence. He launches this incredible deception plan. They are going to act like they're going to attack New York. They're going to burn fires. They're going to write letters and have them intercepted. They're going to march back and forth to make dust, and all the while the Frenchmen are going to march with the Washington troops. They're going to march all the way down 735 miles in 67 days to be outside of Yorktown. Admiral Barras sails for the Chesapeake. That's the one that was with Rochambeau up in Newport. He's got the siege guns, and de Grasse's fleet arrives in Chesapeake Bay on the 22nd of August, 1781. This building to a big battle. On the 11th of July, 1780, we have Admiral Barras' fleet and Rochambeau's army of 5,000 landing in, I went that one. There we go, Battle of Capes. Now we have on 5 September of 1781, off the coast of Virginia, near the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, one of the most critical naval battles of the war is going to occur. And what we have is, there's this picture, I should have pointed this out to you, right there. De Grasse's fleet is there at the port, and he's unloading his soldiers, his 3,000 soldiers, and his weapons, when all of a sudden word reaches him that a British fleet is approaching. Now first they think this is Barras's fleet coming down from Newport, because it should have arrived that day. It didn't. It's another fleet. It's the British fleet, and it's under Hood. He's fought Hood before. He calls his men to get on the boats as quickly as they can. Many don't get the word. Some are in town and don't get the word in time. He sails with what he has. Fortunately, Gray's fleet here, who's on the other side, Graves and Hood, they are very, very slow to act. The winds aren't with them, their signals are messed up, and we don't see them pushing their ships into good order. And you can see that here in this depiction of the time. We have one group that's coming down the winds with this side. We have another group that's been separated. This group never engages in the fight. They never get the word. So not a single cannonball from these things can ever reach the French forces. The French, nevertheless, they managed to get their ships in line, and they offer a rather formidable opposition. So we have here the actual battle, and what you see is the all-out firing. The French are going to get the better end of this. They're going to destroy several British ships. The overall is kind of a draw in the end, but the British fleet realizes it's damaged enough it can't fight again. The two fleets drift south for several days, and finally in the night de Grasse decides they're not going to re-engage. He pulls back and he goes back to Yorktown, and that's the same time Barras's fleet arrives. So on 15 August we have Washington arriving to seal the deal. He's going to set up around Yorktown, and you can start to see in those blue circles all the deployed troops. If you add that together, they've got 37,000 patriots against about 10,000 of the enemy. And how they're going to start? They're going to start with siege works, which is where you dig trenches. You dig trenches, you move your cannons forward, you fire your cannons. At first, they're not going to fire their cannons. They're just going to dig the trenches. This is going to unnerve Cornwallis, who's stuck in Yorktown. He's going to fire as much as he can, and nothing works. His guns are virtually useless in this because they're so well dug in. Nevertheless, they're going to continue to try, and we have Washington himself in October launching the very first round against in return. On the 17th on the 19th of October, we're going to see the white flag come up. We'll have a soldier come in. The flag was actually tied to a saber, which he waved back and forth. The artist got it wrong, and a drummer boy, and they're going to come out and beg to have this thing end. It's really bad inside Yorktown. The siege guns have destroyed most of the terrain. They had to shoot their own horses because they had no feed for them, and the Americans saw 20 horse bodies floating down the river. They knew that things were bad inside. The British came and they said, could you let us retire with dignity? Can we keep our weapons and flags? And Washington said, no, I'm going to treat you like you treated my forces in Lincoln and Charleston. And they went back and they talked to Cornwallis, and Cornwallis had to accept because there was nothing else he could do. Cornwallis had appealed once more to Clinton, and Clinton wasn't coming. Hood had just gotten back to New York to tell him about being whipped in the battle, the naval battle, and they were going to turn around. They set sail to go back to Yorktown on the 19th, the same day that Cornwallis surrendered. So there you have the surrender. That's not Cornwallis. Cornwallis did not want to come out. He sent an Irish general, General O'Hara, who was working below him. General O'Hara came out to give Cornwallis a sword, and he asked to see Rochambeau. He assumed the Frenchman was in charge. And Washington was the commander-in-chief, Rochambeau looked at him and said, the commander-in-chief is over there, and he pointed at Washington. So O'Hara rides over to Washington to give him the sword, and Washington says, I'm not taking it either. You can give it to Lincoln, the man you defeated at Charleston. So Lincoln actually takes the sword. He looks at it, he hands it back, and he said, put it with all the other confiscated arms. They have to throw this sword of Cornwallis in a stack of broken muskets and broken swords that are coming out of Yorktown. And that's what they do. They march all the people out of Yorktown directly into captivity. They're throwing it down. The British play a drinking song at the time, The World Turned Upside Down, and that was because no one thought this could possibly happen. That's the end of the fighting of 1781. It's the last major battle. There are skirmishes after this, but that takes us directly into 1782. What happened in 1782? Mostly offshore stuff. We have Parliament voting to discontinue the war. If you'll remember, because most of us in this room are old enough to remember, the Vietnam War ended when Congress cut funding to the Vietnam War. And so we had the Christmas bombing, all with the knowledge that funding was going to run out. You couldn't do this anymore when the bombing ended because you couldn't get any more money. Parliament did the same thing to the king. You're going to cut this war. And then a few weeks later, they tell him that, or a few days later, they tell him you can go ahead and negotiate an end to this war. Lord Frederick North, who's been the prime minister this entire time, could have been played by Charles Lawton, couldn't he? He resigns. Charles, he looks so much like Charles Lawton. I keep saying Charles Lawton when I think about him. But Lord North has a kind of a speckled reputation in history. He certainly was in charge during the American Revolution, so a lot of people hold that against him. However, he did save the Church of England against some bad things happening at time in home. He also straightened out the tax system for England. So he's gotten kind of a covered reputation in the 20th century that he lost in the 19th. Sir Guy Charleston replaces General Henry Clinton as the commander of British forces in America, because Clinton's kind of been embarrassed by this. Guy Carleton is interesting for two reasons. He commanded the defense of Quebec during the American invasion of 1775, and also he's the one who keeps the promise to the blacks that he's going to write the Book of Negroes that allows 3,000 escaped Negro slaves to escape, not go back into slavery. And most are going to go to Newfoundland, and that's covered on that poster over there as well. So he's kind of a neat guy. And then Admiral Rodney defeats Degrassi. Rodney is a formidable British naval commander of this time period, and virtually in everything involved in talking about the French, Spanish, and English naval war, Rodney's name figures prominently. He doesn't figure prominently in the American Revolution because, quite frankly, he missed Degrassi sailing out of the Caribbean. And Degrassi wanted that to be missed too, because Rodney would have probably taken the fleet out there. Nevertheless, he's going to face him at this battle, the Battle of Saints, also known as the Battle of Dominica. It's an important naval battle, the most important naval battle between the French and the British in this time period. It's a British victory. Rodney commands 36 ships of the line. Degrassi's got 30. The French had 4 ships seized, suffered heavy casualties, 3,000 dead, and Degrassi himself is captured and held in a British prison until war's end. And you can see there, it's a formidable battle, and it makes big news at home, and Rodney's going to be a hero for the rest of his life for his victory at Saints. So then we have the peace negotiations commencing. British forces evacuate Savannah. British forces abandon New York. I'm old enough to remember Evacuation Day celebrations in New York City. On the 25th of November, they used to have this thing where they'd raise a flag, and the flagpole would be greased, and you'd get a man to climb it to get the flag down. It's a long story. Anyway, it's the final departure of the British from New York. In the wake of the leaving, Washington takes 800 troops, and he marches them from the north side of his headquarters north of the city all the way down to the Harlem River. He has to stop, though, because at Fort George, right in the harbor there, that little round fort, there was still a Union Jack flying, and he wasn't going to march under the shadow of a Union Jack. The flag had been nailed to a flagpost, and the British had greased a flagpole, so you couldn't take it down. There was an intrepid veteran, John Van Arsdale, who manages to hammer cleats into the flagpole, make it to the top, and take the Union Jack down while the British are still in sight. And everybody cheers and George marches in. So that's how they celebrated the Evacuation Day, and again, that's why they greased the flagpole. Greased flagpoles actually go back to an old Italian custom. We can talk offline if you're interested. And then we go back to the peace treaty. The peace treaty is signed. There's some of the signatures, John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, that you'll recognize. And the British forces finally evacuate Charleston, and they're finally done. That brings us to 1783. 1783, Spain recognizes the U.S. as an independent nation, so we've now got France and Spain on our side. The Nuremberg Rebellion is quashed, and I want to talk just a second about that, because this Nuremberg conspiracy is kind of a big moment in studying military leadership. It happens in March 1783. Newburgh is a little town, it's now New Windsor, New York. And a group of officers who's upset about congressional treatment of the military, the fact they haven't been paid in years, they decide to rebel. They're going to march on D.C. On the morning of March 10th, there's an unsigned anonymous letter circulating around camp saying that we're all going to get together and we're going to have a meeting. Washington finds out and he's upset. He puts his general order out in the day and says, no, we're going to have a meeting on the 15th. And he doesn't say he's going to be there. He just says the officers will meet on the 15th. So they meet on the 15th. On the 15th meeting, they meet at the new building called the Temple. It's still there. They've built a rebuilding of it. It's a 40 by 70 foot building. After General Horatio Gates opens the meeting, Washington enters. Everybody's shocked. They didn't expect to see him. He asked to speak to the officers, and Gates is certainly not going to say no, so he relinquishes 4. Washington knew that his men were tired. He knew they were very angry. They hadn't been paid. They didn't look happy. They weren't treating him with the respect and dignity to which he was accustomed, which I assume means they didn't stand when he walked in. He gave a short but impassioned speech, the Newburgh Address. You may have read it in high school. It's touching, but it's not what broke the siege. His message was, those who wickedly attempt to open the floodgates of civil discord and deluge our rising empire in blood should be punished. He then pulled out a letter from Congress, and this is where he got him. He halted for a moment, and he took out a pair of spectacles. And he said this, gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only gone gray, but I've gone blind in the service of my country. And then he reads the letter. And that moment brought his men to tears. They were just moved. They realized that this man had sacrificed more than anyone. And we could talk about how much he asked for from Congress later on, but virtually his entire fortune had been soaked into this war. They were humiliated that they had ever stood against him. They moved to tears. They left the room. General Knox and others reaffirmed their loyalty. They wrote a new letter, and in their new draft, they talk about their unshaken confidence in Congress and their disdain and abhorrence of any of those who stand against them. That is Washington in his spectacles addressing the Nuremberg conspiracy. Kind of a neat picture. We have the Peace of Paris, which formally ends the American War on 3 September, and then we have the rest of the story is George Washington. He issues his farewell orders to the Continental Army on 2 November. He builds his farewell to his officers. Again, it's very tearful, it's very touching. Washington himself is not depicted as crying. Washington's kind of a stoic figure. He was rather calm and cool and collected. The only time I've ever caught Washington out of character was crossing the Delaware when he told Henry Knox, move your fat ass, Henry, because Henry was a rather large man and was causing the boat to founder. But nevertheless, there was one time a bet with some friends in Washington who said, I bet you can't put your arms around George and look up at him and say, how's it going, George? And the guy took the bet, put his arm around George, said, how's it going, George? And George looked at him, and his glance was withering. The guy just slid off him and was slithered away. So he's not a guy who's given to emotion. He's not a guy who's given to that type of antic. Nevertheless, this is him there in the back. You notice he's not crying or hugging anyone, but everyone around him is in tears because their leader is leaving. And then he resigns his commission as commander-in-chief before Congress, and there's a beautiful depiction of that, and there's several paintings in Congress of that moment. All Washington speeches are worth your time. This one is a particularly good speech, and I would urge you to get a hold of that. So that leaves us here. The American Crisis was a series of pamphlets that was written by Thomas Paine throughout the war. I think there were 13 of them, but we'll find out in a second. The pamphlets represented the continuation of the war, and they were trying to drive people to support the war. He starts off the first one with those very familiar words, these are the times that try men's souls. And then he talks about how bad things are. And throughout this time, he's always telling the Americans, you can do this, you can do this. By the time the war is over, he's aged considerably, and he writes this in the final American Crisis, number 13. The times that try men's soul are over, and the greatest and most completest revolution the world has ever known, gloriously and happily accomplished. America has it in her choice to do and to live as happily as she pleases. The world is in her hands. It's been 231 years since he wrote those words. However, thanks to service and sacrifice of the Americans at that time and the Americans since, including people in this room, we still have that option. America still has it in her choice to do and to live as happily as she pleases. I hope you will do and live happy, meaningful lives and continue what these wonderful people started. That's what we talked about today, American Victoria, 1781 to 1783. I covered that. Do you have any questions?